The day my wife left me for another man, she didn't cry. That was the part I remember most. She stood in our living room with a small suitcase beside her, wearing the necklace I had given her on our 5th anniversary. Her eyes were cold, almost impatient, as if she had already said goodbye to me weeks ago. "I'm leaving, Daniel." I stared at her. "Leaving where?" She took a slow breath. "To someone who can give me the life I deserve." My heart sank. "Someone?" She looked away for a second before finally meeting my eyes. "His name is Richard. He has money, connections, a beautiful house, everything you could never give me." I felt like the air had disappeared from the room. For 8 years I had worked quietly. I had come home late, missed dinners, and spent nights staring at numbers on my laptop. Whenever she asked why I was working so hard, I told her I was building something for our future. She used to believe me. Apparently, she didn't anymore. "Do you love him?" I asked. She hesitated. Then she said the words that broke something inside me. "I love what my life could be with him." I looked at the suitcase, then at our wedding photograph hanging on the wall. 8 years of memories, gone because another man had a bigger house. "You're really choosing money over us," I whispered. She shook her head. "No, Daniel, I'm choosing a better future." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to tell her that the small apartment she thought I struggled to afford wasn't the only property I owned. I wanted to tell her why I had never driven the expensive car sitting inside my private garage. I wanted to tell her who had been signing the business contracts she thought belonged to someone else. But I said nothing. Not yet. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned around. "I hope you find someone who accepts the life you can give them." The door closed. I stood there alone. Then, for the first time in 8 years, I opened the locked drawer in my study. Inside was the truth she had never known. And one phone call was about to change everything. For the first few days after she left, I barely slept. Every corner of the apartment reminded me of her. Her coffee mug was still sitting beside the kitchen sink. Her favorite sweater was hanging behind the bedroom door. On the refrigerator, there was still a photograph from our 1st anniversary, when we were both laughing because the cake I had ordered arrived completely ruined. Back then, she didn't care about expensive things. Or at least, I thought she didn't. We hadn't started with much. When I met Emily, I was driving an old sedan and renting a tiny apartment above a grocery store. She never complained. We would split cheap dinners, walk through the park on weekends, and spend hours talking about the future. She used to tell me, "I don't need a mansion. I just want a husband who never gives up on me." I believed her, so when my business began growing, I didn't tell her everything. That might sound strange, but there was a reason. My father had built a company from nothing before he passed away. After his death, I inherited control of it, but I promised myself I wouldn't become the kind of man who measured his worth by his bank account. So I kept my life simple. I drove an ordinary car. I wore inexpensive clothes. I lived in a modest apartment, and every month, I quietly invested most of my earnings back into the company. Emily knew I worked in business, but she thought I was still struggling to make it. At first, she was proud of me. Then something changed. Her friends began getting married to wealthy men. Their social media pages were filled with luxury vacations, expensive restaurants, designer clothes, and huge houses. Emily started comparing our life to theirs. "Why can't we live like that?" she asked one night. "We will," I told her. "Just give me time." She laughed bitterly. "You always say that." I didn't realize that those words were slowly becoming the distance between us. Soon, simple dinners weren't good enough. Our apartment wasn't good enough. My car embarrassed her. Even the way I dressed became something she criticized. One evening, she came home from dinner with her friends and said, "Do you know what one of them told me?" I looked up from my laptop. "What?" She said, "I'm wasting my best years waiting for a man who may never become successful." I closed the laptop. "And you believe her?" She didn't answer. That silence hurt more than any insult. What Emily didn't know was that the company I had been building had just signed its biggest contract ever. Within months, it would become one of the fastest-growing private companies in the country. I could have told her. I could have shown her the numbers, but I wanted her to love the man sitting across from her, not the money behind him. I never imagined that keeping my wealth private would eventually become the very reason she left me. And then Richard walked into her life. The man who had everything she thought I didn't. The man who would unknowingly lead her straight back to the truth. Richard entered our lives on a Tuesday evening. Emily had been invited to a business dinner by one of her friends, and I remember her standing in front of the mirror for nearly an hour before leaving. She wore a black dress I had never seen before. "You look beautiful," I told her. She barely smiled. "Thank you." Then she grabbed her purse and walked out. I didn't know it then, but that dinner would change our marriage forever. The next morning, Emily came home unusually quiet. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open when she walked in. "You're awake?" she asked. "I've been waiting for you." She placed her purse on the counter. "We met someone last night." Something in her voice made me look up. "Who?" "Richard Hayes." I recognized the name. Everyone in our business circle did. Richard was a wealthy investor who owned several companies, luxury properties, and had connections that reached far beyond our city. "He's successful," Emily said. "I've heard." She smiled. "He's different." That word stayed with me, different. Over the next few weeks, Richard's name appeared in almost every conversation. Richard had bought a new penthouse. Richard had taken his friends to Europe. Richard had opened another company. Richard knew famous people. Richard drove a car that cost more than our apartment. I tried not to react, but then Emily started coming home later. She began dressing differently. She stopped asking about my work, and whenever I suggested spending time together, she always seemed to have somewhere else to be. One Friday night, I finally asked her, "Is there something going on between you and Richard?" And she stared at me for several seconds. Then she said, "I don't know." That answer hurt more than if she had simply lied. "Emily, you're my wife." "I know." "Then act like it." Her expression hardened. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." She stood up. "I've spent 8 years waiting for things to change, Daniel. They are changing. When?" I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know, because I couldn't reveal everything yet. She shook her head. "That's exactly the problem." 2 weeks later, she came home with a smile I hadn't seen in months. "We need to talk." I already knew. She told me Richard had offered her a completely different life, a beautiful home, travel, security, conscience, everything she believed she had been missing. "I think I deserve more," she said. I looked at her quietly. "More than me." She looked down. "More than this life." That was when I understood. She wasn't leaving because Richard was better than me. She was leaving because she had decided my value was measured by what I owned. I could have stopped her. One phone call would have revealed the truth. But I didn't make it. Instead, I watched the woman I loved walk toward a life she believed was better. And as her car disappeared down the street, I whispered to myself, "She'll learn the truth eventually." I just didn't know how much it would cost her to learn it. The next morning, Emily was gone before I woke up. There was no goodbye, no note, just an empty space in the closet where her clothes had been. For a few seconds, I stood in the bedroom doorway, hoping I had somehow misunderstood everything. Then I saw the envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was her wedding ring, and beneath it was a short message. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I need a different life." That was all. 8 years of marriage reduced to 6 words. I sat down at the table and stared at the ring. I remembered the day I put it on her finger. She had been crying that day, promising me she would stay beside me through everything. Now she had left because someone else could offer her more. I didn't call her. I didn't beg. I didn't ask her to come back. But that didn't mean I wasn't destroyed inside. For 3 days, I barely left the apartment. I kept replaying every conversation we had ever had, every time she complained about money, every time I told her to trust me, every time she said she was proud of me. I wondered when those words had stopped being true. On the 4th day, I finally went into my study. I opened the locked drawer. Inside was a black folder containing documents Emily had never seen. The first page showed the name of my company. The second showed its current valuation. I stared at the numbers for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. There was one person I needed to call. My longtime business partner, Marcus. He answered immediately. "Daniel, I was wondering when you'd call." She left. There was silence. "Emily?" "Yes," Marcus sighed. "I'm sorry." I looked at the documents on my desk. "Don't be. You sure?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I spent 8 years building this company quietly. I thought I was protecting my marriage. And now? I looked at the wedding ring sitting beside the folder. "Now I'm going to stop hiding." Marcus understood immediately. "What do you want me to do?" I gave him the instructions. "Prepare everything. The board meeting is Monday." There was a pause. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I looked out the window. For the first time since Emily left, I didn't feel helpless. Yes, Monday morning would be the first time the world saw the man I had kept hidden, and sooner or later, Emily would see him too. But there was something I didn't know yet. Richard wasn't just a wealthy man who had taken my wife. He was about to make a business decision that would put him directly in my path. And when that happened, he would finally discover who he had taken her from. For years, Emily believed I was an ordinary businessman trying to survive. That was exactly how I wanted it. But the truth was much bigger than she ever imagined. My father had built a technology company called Hayes Global before he died. At the time, it was already successful, but he had one rule for me: never let money decide who stays in your life. I never forgot those words. When he passed away, I inherited the controlling shares of the company. I could have moved into a mansion. I could have bought expensive cars. I could have surrounded myself with people who treated me differently because of my wealth. Instead, I did the opposite. I created a separate identity for my personal life. I rented a modest apartment. I drove an old car. I dressed like an average office employee. And I kept my connection to the company private. Only 3 people knew the truth: Marcus, my father's former business partner, our chief financial officer, and me. Even Emily didn't know. At first, keeping the secret was easy. She loved our simple life. She loved cooking dinner with me. She loved our weekend walks. She used to laugh whenever I told her that one day we'd build something incredible together. But slowly, things changed. The more successful her friends became, the more she looked at our life with disappointment. I tried to ignore it. I thought if I worked hard enough, eventually I could give her everything without changing who I was. But I was wrong. After she left, I finally understood something painful. I had spent years trying to protect our relationship from money. But money had already become more important to her than the relationship itself. On Monday morning, I walked into Hayes Global headquarters for the first time in almost 3 years. The receptionist stood immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." I nodded. People in the lobby turned to look at me. Some recognized me. Others simply followed the receptionist's reaction. I entered the private elevator and went straight to the executive floor. Marcus was waiting outside the boardroom. He smiled when he saw me. "Welcome back, Daniel." I looked through the glass wall at the executives sitting around the table. "How is the company?" "Stronger than ever." He handed me a folder. "Our latest valuation is just over $800 million. I looked at the number without emotion. $800 million. The amount Emily had never known existed. But strangely, I didn't feel proud. I felt empty, because the person I had wanted to share it with was gone. Marcus watched my face. "You still love her?" I didn't answer immediately. "Yes," I finally said. He nodded. But that doesn't mean you have to take her back. I know. I opened the folder. Inside was the most important document, a major acquisition proposal. The company we were considering buying was owned by a man named Richard Hayes. I froze. Richard Hayes? Marcus nodded. That's him. I slowly leaned back in my chair. The same Richard who had taken my wife. The same man who believed he could buy a better life. He was about to negotiate with the one person he never expected to meet, me. Marcus looked at me carefully. Should we cancel the deal? I shook my head. No, then what do we do? I closed the folder. We proceed. I wasn't going to destroy Richard. I wasn't going to humiliate Emily. I simply wanted the truth to come out naturally, because the most powerful revenge wasn't making them suffer. It was letting them discover, on their own, that they had completely misunderstood the man they had walked away from. And soon, Richard was going to learn exactly who I was. Richard thought he had won. For the first few weeks after Emily moved in with him, everything looked perfect from the outside. She lived in his massive house. She drove a luxury car. She wore expensive clothes and attended events she once only saw online. And whenever someone asked about her husband, she simply said, "That part of my life is over." But Richard made one mistake. He underestimated me. The business deal between Hayes Global and Richard's company was scheduled for Friday morning. Richard walked into the conference room wearing an expensive suit, confident that he was about to secure the biggest partnership of his career. He had no idea who was waiting for him. Marcus stood at the end of the table. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming." Richard smiled. "Of course. I'm looking forward to doing business together." Then the conference room doors opened. I walked in. Richard looked at me. For a second, he didn't recognize me. Then his expression changed. "You?" I sat across from him. "Good morning, Richard." He stared at me in confusion. "What are you doing here?" Marcus calmly placed a folder on the table. "Mr. Daniel Hayes is the majority owner and chairman of Hayes Global." Richard's face went completely blank. He looked at Marcus, then back at me. "That can't be true." I didn't respond. He opened the folder. The documents confirmed everything. The company he had been trying to impress wasn't owned by some distant billionaire he had never met. It belonged to the man whose wife he had taken. Richard slowly leaned back. "You're Daniel?" "Yes," he swallowed. "I had no idea. I know." For the first time, Richard looked nervous, then he tried to recover. "Look, whatever happened between you and Emily has nothing to do with business." I nodded. "I agree." That seemed to calm him, until I continued. "But business decisions have consequences." I slid another document across the table. His company was struggling. He needed our investment to survive. Without our deal, several of his expansion plans would collapse. Richard stared at the numbers. "You're going to destroy my company." "No." I looked directly into his eyes. "I'm simply not going to rescue a company that doesn't meet our standards." He understood. I wasn't taking revenge. I was making a business decision. Richard left the meeting without signing the agreement. That evening, Emily called me. I stared at her name on my phone for several seconds before answering. "Daniel?" Her voice sounded different, uncertain. "I need to talk to you." I already knew why. She had finally discovered who I really was. And now she wanted to know whether she had made the biggest mistake of her life. But she didn't know the hardest part was still coming, because the man she had left behind was no longer waiting for her. Emily arrived at my office the next morning. She didn't look like the woman who had walked out on me weeks earlier. Her confidence was gone. She stood outside my office door holding her purse tightly, looking nervous. "Daniel?" I looked up from my desk. "Come in." She stepped inside slowly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" I knew exactly what she meant. "You never asked." Her eyes filled with tears. "That isn't fair." I leaned back in my chair. "Isn't it?" She shook her head. "I thought you were struggling. I thought you were trying to build a future." I was. But you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I didn't answer. She walked toward the window. I saw you at the company yesterday. I know. Everyone treated you like you were someone important. I looked at her. I was always someone important, Emily. She turned around. That isn't what I meant. Yes, it is. She looked down. I was wrong. Those 3 words were quiet, but I could hear the regret behind them. She sat across from me. Richard never told me his company was in trouble. He didn't have to. She wiped a tear from her cheek. I thought you couldn't give me the life I wanted. You had the life you needed. She looked at me, and I threw it away. I didn't respond. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small box. My wedding ring. The same ring she had left on our kitchen table. I kept it, she said. I stared at the box. Why? Because I couldn't stop thinking about us. She opened it. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I took a slow breath. Emily, you didn't leave because you didn't know I was wealthy. She looked confused. You left because you believed my value depended on how much money I had. Her eyes filled with tears again. I know. And if I had been exactly the man you thought I was, would you have stayed? She couldn't answer. That silence told me everything. She finally whispered, I don't know. I nodded. That is why we can't go back. She started crying. Please, Daniel, I still love you. I believed her. That was the hardest part, because I still loved her too. But love wasn't enough anymore. Trust had been broken. And some doors, once closed, shouldn't be forced open again. She stood slowly. Before leaving, she looked at me one last time. I wish I had known who you really were. I shook my head. You did know me, Emily. She stopped. You just didn't value the man you knew. She walked out quietly. I watched the door close. For years, I had been afraid that if Emily discovered my wealth, everything would change. Now I understood the truth. Her discovery hadn't changed anything. It had only revealed what had already been there. And for the first time, I wasn't angry that she had left. I was grateful she had shown me who she really was before I spent the rest of my life wondering. 3 days after Emily left my office, she came back one last time. This time, she wasn't carrying a suitcase. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking about Richard. She simply wanted an answer. Daniel, she said quietly, is there any chance we can start over? I looked at her for a long moment. A part of me wanted to say yes. I still remembered our first apartment, our late-night conversations, the way she used to hold my hand when we had nothing. But I also remembered the day she looked me in the eyes and told me I couldn't give her the life she deserved. I loved you before you knew about my money, I said. She nodded. And I loved you when you thought I had nothing. Tears rolled down her cheeks. But when you discovered I had everything, you suddenly wanted me back. I know, she whispered. That isn't the kind of love I want anymore. She lowered her head. I deserve that. I stood and walked toward the window. For years, I had believed success meant proving people wrong. Now I understood something different. Successes wasn't making Emily regret leaving. It wasn't watching Richard lose his business. It wasn't showing the world how wealthy I really was. Success was being able to walk away without needing revenge. I turned back toward her. I forgive you. She looked up. But I can't take you back. Her face broke. I understand. She placed the wedding ring on my desk. Then she walked toward the door. Before she left, she stopped. I really did love you, Daniel. I smiled sadly. I know. The door closed behind her. I picked up the ring and looked at it one final time. Then I placed it inside the same drawer where I had kept my biggest secret for years. This time, I wasn't hiding anything. I was simply letting go. Emily had left me because she thought I was a man with nothing. Later, she discovered I had more money than she could ever imagine. But that wasn't the real truth. The real truth was much simpler. She didn't lose me when she discovered who I really was. She lost me the day she decided my worth depended on what I could buy, and that was the day I finally discovered who I really was too. A man who no longer needed anyone's approval to know his own value.